Just waiting for the participant count to go up a little bit. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Erin McCallum. I'm AASA's Associate Executive Director of Strategy and Communications. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining today, and especially all of our panelists for taking the time to speak up today for public education and against the Educational Choice for Children Act, which is included in the House bill that just passed this morning in Congress. I will make sure to introduce each speaker before their remarks, but first just want to kick this off with a few housekeeping items. Every participant besides the panelists are off video and on mute for the duration of the webinar. We're asking that you please save all of your questions until the Q&A portion of this town hall, which is after the speaker remarks. And you should notice that in the bottom kind of right of your screen, there is a Q&A box, and that is where you will be able to enter your questions as they come to you. So just put them in there and I will select from that question box which questions we get to. If we will try to get to every question, but if we don't have time, please feel free to email media@aasa.org. I'll say that again at the end with any follow-up questions, and we'll do our best to get back to you. One more note that this webinar is recorded, and we'll make sure we send the recording out to all registrants, and that will be also posted on the resources section of the AASA website. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, David Schuler. He's the Executive Director of AASA, the School Superintendents Association. Thanks, Dave.
You bet. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this urgent and timely conversation. This is without a doubt an unprecedented moment with significant implications for the future of America's public schools. I'm David Schuler, Executive Director of AASA, the School Superintendents Association. AASA has the distinguished privilege and pleasure of supporting our nation's public school leaders and the more than 50 million students they serve day in and day out, rural, urban, suburban, and everything in between across this great country. America's public schools exist to make good on America's promise to her children, that every child in every community has an opportunity to dream, hope, plan, and succeed on a path of their choosing. It's a promise we take seriously and we support daily as the shepherds of public education. Now, as you're all well aware, threats to public school funding are nothing new. Our educators and administrators are used to pulling off nothing short of miracles each year for our nation's children with the limited resources available. But today, we're here to talk about a current threat to the future of public schools that could have a disastrous implication for the future of public education. The proposal to create a national private school voucher program included in the reconciliation bill that passed in the House just this morning represents a dramatic and dangerous shift away from a long-standing bipartisan agreement in Congress that public funds remain in the public schools that serve 9 out of every 10 students in America. What's equally concerning is that this proposal would be funded through a major tax shelter that serves to benefit only the most wealthy Americans, and that this is happening at the same time as this administration is proposing a 15% decrease to the programs that exist to help public schools address academic inequities. We know from recent data coming out of the states that the vast majority of children benefiting from the voucher program are already attending private schools. These are the kids and families who are already in the privileged position of having options and means. What Congress is proposing would take money from public schools, from the schools with an obligation to serve every child in every community, in order to funnel that money to private schools who can pick and choose who they educate, with no accountability measures attached in terms of how those dollars are spent or how success is measured by either schools or families. The economic burden of this unequal redistribution of public funding will be shouldered by the states and districts and taxpayers who can least afford it, many of whom have not elected to participate in voucher programs. We know that local families, property taxpayers, will have to either make up for the shortfall created by this, or they will have to say goodbye to programs that enrich and benefit their children and communities. Programs like early childhood, music and the arts, STEM, low class sizes, and other critical programs that prepare America's children for real life in the real world. The stakes could not be higher, my friends, for our children and our communities who rely on public schools. And I'm incredibly grateful to each and every one of our speakers and guests here today, speaking up against the creation of taxpayer-funded secondary system of private education that plays by different rules. AASA is honored to co-chair the National Coalition on Public Education, a coalition of more than 60 national education, civil rights, disability, religious, parent, and community groups working together to oppose federal school vouchers. You can join this critical effort by taking action today before it's too late. We will put this in the chat, but please visit novouchers.org and make sure you tell Congress you oppose this damaging voucher package. Thank you to everyone here today standing up for the future of public education. Erin, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Dave. Next up, we have Amy Hanauer, the Executive Director of the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks so much for having me be part of this event this morning. My name is Amy Hanauer. I run the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, and you can find everything I'm talking about today at our website at itep.org. That's itep.org. Most of this was written by my brilliant research director, Carl Davis. So the House reconciliation bill that passed the House in the wee hours this morning is extremely problematic for inequality and for schools, and I'm going to talk about the tax perspective on this. It allocates $5 billion a year in tax credits for tax benefits for vouchers to organizations that provide private and religious school vouchers. It triples the tax benefit to people giving to private K-12 school vouchers, and it creates a full dollar-for-dollar rebate. Just to be clear, no other charity, not pediatric cancer research, not disaster relief, not assisting disabled veterans, nothing gets this level of tax incentive. In fact, the bill cuts benefits for other charitable donations, and no other charity has ever gotten this kind of one-for-one payback from the federal government. But it gets worse. This bill would actually allow those who donate stock to avoid the capital gains tax entirely. The result would be a profitable tax shelter for wealthy people who agree to help funnel public funds into private schools. That is to say, they would get more money by donating their stock than by selling it. So wealthy people with no interest in vouchers who go to their tax advisors and say, I'm thinking about selling this stock, would hear their advisors say, no, don't sell, donate your stock to a private school and you'll make more money. This is the quintessential definition of a tax shelter. It gets people with no interest in the cause to participate. But usually when Congress creates some sort of a tax shelter, it's accidental. In this case, it's actually intentional. So we estimate that this bill would reduce federal tax revenues by $23.2 billion over the next 10 years as currently drafted. But the truth is that they almost certainly intend to extend this beyond the 4 years that they've drafted it for, just as they are currently extending tax cuts that they drafted and set to expire. So if it goes beyond the 4-year expiration date, it would cost $67 billion over the next decade. Because state income taxes largely piggyback on federal law, the bill would also reduce state tax revenue by $459 million over the next 10 years as currently drafted, or by $1.1 billion if it's extended as is likely. This would be especially damaging to certain states like California, Connecticut, Illinois, Georgia, but it would hurt every state because it would expand vouchers even in places where voters have very recently explicitly rejected them, like Kentucky, Nebraska, and Colorado. And I think you'll hear from someone from Kentucky a little later this morning. The bill would facilitate $2.2 billion in federal and state capital gains tax avoidance over the next 10 years, again, as currently drafted. And if extended, that would rise to $5.2 billion. Elon Musk would have cut his capital gains tax bill by $690 million alone, him personally, if this had been in effect in 2021. So to sum up, this is an unprecedented giveaway that would enrich the wealthiest people, particularly those whose incomes come from stock, not from working, and it would enrich private schools that are allowed to reject many students. And who would it take money from? From all of us collectively and from public schools. This is a destructive and flawed policy, and we can't allow it to go through. Thanks for giving me a chance to be part of this.
Thank you, Amy. Next up, we have Denise Fort, the President and Chief Executive Officer of EdTrust. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I really hope folks listen to what Amy just told us, because what you just heard, it's all part of the great American heist on public education. Look, at EdTrust, our North Star, it's always been about expanding opportunity and improving outcomes for students of color, particularly Black and Latino students, students with disabilities, students from low-income backgrounds. But the Educational Choice for Children Act, it's just a direct attack. It's a direct attack on those for whom our system hasn't worked for far too long. It's not reform. As you heard from Amy, it's about the dollars. It is not about student outcomes. It is the great American heist. And let's be honest here, there is nothing new here. Voucher schemes have been around for a long time. And in fact, they have a very, very ugly lineage. Look, just last week, we celebrated and commemorated the 71st anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. And it wasn't that long ago when some Southern states used vouchers like these to fund white-only private schools, dodging integration, but still using public dollars. And then fast forward to today, this Congress, in the wee hours of the morning, did a rubber stamp of the same old tactics. They may be cloaking it in new branding, educational choice for children, but it's the same old, and it's still rooted in deep inequities. So what do we get for this $20 billion federal tax credit giveaway? Well, we're certainly not going to see an improvement in student outcomes. The evidence points to that. Fewer protections for our kiddos, less transparency. Again, it's the great American heist. Private schools receiving these dollars are not bound by federal civil rights laws. That means that a Black student, a Latino student, will they get access to the highest rigor of advanced coursework? Will we know that they're not being disciplined more harshly than their peers? There is no recourse for them. There is no justice. And again, and I think if anyone is talking about vouchers as a means to improve student outcomes, let's look at that. But there will be no requirements for these students, for us to, the public, to even have a view on student outcomes. So we'll know that dollars are being siphoned off from public schools, but we won't really know if any actual learning is going on. Look, the research is clear. Check out edtrust.org. Check out novouchers.org. Kiddos who go to schools via vouchers, there's no evidence they do any better than those who stay in public schools. Why would we want to continue to shift public dollars away from public schools to fund a system with no accountability for results? It's nothing short of theft. It's taking dollars away from programs that would strengthen all schools, expand access to early childhood, make sure that our kids have access to mental health counselors, to other mental health supports, resources our students need that you are not going to get from the private marketplace. And let me say this lastly, because I do think this is really important. Our children do not deserve to be experimented on. We need investments, we need equity, and we need the truth. Our students are brilliant. They can and do excel when given the opportunity, and they deserve the opportunity. They do not deserve the great American heist. When at a moment when we need to be doubling down so that our kids are learning to read, learning to math, all ECCA does is just sells us this as another piece of innovation when it's really just the same old, a tax credit for the wealthy. We need to get rid of this provision. The fight is not over, and EdTrust is with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise. Next up, we have Jacqueline Rodriguez, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Oh, it's so great to be with you all. And I cannot applaud Denise and Amy and David more right now. I'm so thrilled to be alongside all of the panelists. I think you've brought together a really valuable set of thought leaders to discuss not just this provision, but what those in the audience can be doing about it. As Erin mentioned, I'm the CEO of NCLD, the National Center for Learning Disabilities, and we're also pleased to co-chair the National Coalition for Public Education alongside AASA. We are, as you all know, stronger in numbers, and this coalition has united so many organizations who oppose private school vouchers. I really believe those of you on the call right now, we have now something to do today, tomorrow, and the following to achieve what we know is in the betterment of all kids, which is to ensure that this doesn't pass. So I'm going to talk to you about three things, and I will try to be brief as I know other panelists are going to be discussing similar ideas. NCLD represents a constituency of people with learning disabilities, but in truth, we represent the disability community. And as David mentioned earlier, I want to make sure you hear this again. This is not about school choice. It's wonderful rhetoric, and in some cases it works really well when people don't realize, but you all now hear this. This is not about giving families or parents choice. I'm a parent. This is about giving schools choice to discriminate against kids. Private schools have the capacity and do every single day decide to cherry pick who they admit into their school programs. And while there may be a provision here that indicates something related to the IEP, I'll talk to you more about how that provision doesn't just fall short, it's a lie. This is not something that parents should be looking at as an opportunity, because what's happening is parents who bring kids with disabilities into private schools forego their IDEA rights when they move into that environment, and schools have no obligation to attend, as Denise said, to the civil rights legislations that ensure that they're protected and they have high quality and rigorous academic interventions and outcomes. So just as a note, there are lots of characteristics beyond disability that private schools actually use to cherry pick students, including income and faith and LGBTQ status and more. And you'll hear from some of the speakers around those pieces. Our perspective on this is that private schools not only make their own admission decisions and they determine their own academic support offerings, but more often than not, those decisions they make for parents are rooted in discrimination. And they often result in excluding students with disabilities or those families. And in many cases, we've seen time after time voucher programs that do exist don't just discriminate against, they also ensure that parents remove students from those environments back into public schools, but without their public funds. The House version of ECCA, which we've just discussed, includes this language around IEPs, that a private school would have to attend the IEP the student comes to the school with. But here's the bottom line here. There's no enforcement tactic alongside that provision. At this point, we could even guesstimate that as this is a part of a financial perspective, that the IRS would have to come into schools and determine if the private school specifically is actually using the IEP as it's meant to be properly implemented, and whether or not those accommodations and either modifications are being implemented to the degree necessary for the student to thrive. That's not something that the public is expecting the IRS or any other agency outside of the Department of Education to provide. It also doesn't think about things like the least restrictive environment or school discipline protections that Denise just mentioned, the disproportionate impact on students of color with disabilities who are already excluded from schools and classrooms at a higher proportion than their white counterparts. It doesn't enforce or ensure dispute resolution. What happens when a parent says, we don't actually agree with what's happening, or we don't necessarily think that this is what's best for my child? There's no mechanism for the parent to lift that up and have an actual reconciliation of those types of things. And in particular, I want to also highlight that there is no provision here that ensures that private schools would have what we consider high quality profession ready educators. IDEA requires that students with disabilities are taught by certified individuals in that content area, and yet private schools have to abide by no mandate whatsoever in that space. And so what's to say that a private school will take your dollars but not provide the type of high quality education your child deserves? And I'll finalize by doubling down on what was mentioned by Denise a minute ago. There is absolutely no evidence that vouchers that are currently in play have had any positive academic outcomes for kids. In reality, it actually looks like voucher programs have detrimental academic impacts for kids. And so to do this in light of that evidence is just flummoxing at best.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Next up, we have Amanda Tyler. She's the Executive Director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Amanda.
Thanks so much, Erin, and thanks to all my co-panelists for raising all of these really concerning elements of this bill. And I'm here to talk about how concerning this provision is, this national school voucher program would be for those Americans who care about religious freedom. You know, one of the foundational values of our pluralistic democracy is the separation of church and state. And it's built on this premise that government money would not fund religion. Well, a national school voucher program will fund religion, and it will do so with tax dollars. The vast majority of students who attend private schools attend private religious schools. And in these religious schools, religion, in most of them, religion is integral to that religious education. They cannot separate their faith from their teaching, and nor should they, but they also shouldn't do it with public money. Taxpayers' dollars should never be used to pay for anyone's religious education. And funding religion through compulsory taxation violates religious freedom and these foundational ideas that are critical to our pluralistic democracy. As has been noted several times, private schools play by different rules than public schools. They don't have the same layers of accountability. They also do not guarantee freedom of religion and other civil rights that are guaranteed in the public schools. This program would divert public money away from public schools, weakening the only system that is designed to serve every child. Private schools, by contrast, can and do discriminate in their admissions practices, in their hiring practices, and they are protected in doing so by some of these ideas of religious freedom. But again, they do it without government money when they do it. This system, this particular provision would take away those foundational protections for all of these students and teachers and administrators in education, and would divert it away from the public system. Public schools are the training ground for young citizens to be full participants in our pluralistic democracy. They're microcosms of our pluralistic democracy, places where one can encounter people from all different walks of life, including from different religious traditions. And tearing down that system, weakening that system, will hurt our ability to protect religious freedom across the culture in many different ways. So in short, this provision is bad for faith communities, it's bad for religious freedom, and it's bad for public education. As has been noted many times, the wealthiest families are the ones who have the most to stand to benefit, and low-income students will get left out. This provision said it will cost $5 billion a year. That's money that we could be using for teachers, for classrooms, for special education, for all sorts of programs that are underfunded now and could be strengthened if this money was not being taken away from them. This voucher scheme provides an unprecedented dollar-for-dollar tax credit to donors, as Amy so clearly explained to us. And that's 3 times as much as donors receive in tax deductions for giving to food banks, to houses of worship, to places that serve the unhoused. All of these really important charities that serve our government will have less and less of a tax credit than this scheme will provide for private education. I think we also have to ask ourselves, why? Why is this provision being stuck into this large bill that's being rammed through that was rammed through the House of Representatives in an early morning vote that's going over to the Senate now? And the fact is, voucher schemes are largely unpopular. They have bipartisan opposition for all of the reasons that you've heard in this town hall this morning. And so rather than go for and make people vote on an up and down vote in the House, they stuck it in this big bill, hoping that it would slip under the radar and be passed because there are so many other troubling provisions in this bill. Voucher schemes have been put on the ballot in 17 states. They have gone down in all 17 states. People oppose private school voucher programs. We need to stand together and insist that this provision be taken out of this bill and not be passed by Congress this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Next, we have Ginny Mott, the Vice President of the Maine PTA, and here today is a representative of the National PTA, Ginny. Sorry. Oh, Ginny, you're on mute. You just have to unmute. Yeah.
Yep, there we go. Thank you. Of course, do that now. Hi, everyone. I'm a recently retired teacher, and I live in rural Maine, where I also taught. I've been a member of the Parent-Teacher Association for almost 20 years now at the local, state, and national levels. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you today, to speak up for public schools, and with all these fabulous other speakers sharing so much with us. Although marketed as school choice for parents, the real choice under school vouchers would lie not with families, but rather with the private schools themselves, who often deny enrollment to families. For rural working families, limited availability, distance, lack of transportation, and the cost of tuition beyond what the voucher would cover means for many families, there is no realistic choice. Currently in my state here in Maine, some parents do choose to enroll their children in a private school or to homeschool them. Some of these children then transition to their local public school if the private school or homeschooling didn't suit the family's needs. As a public school teacher, I was held to professional standards. There are learning standards our public school students are expected to meet. Time and time again, a student entering public school with a private school or homeschool background was below grade level in several, if not all, academic areas. Those students needed extra support to catch up with their peers at taxpayer expense. It would add insult to injury if public schools also lost funds in order to support vouchers. Additionally, the departure of even a few students can have a magnified impact on the school budget and leave our rural schools with fewer resources to educate children and serve the community. Rural communities, children and families will be especially hard hit by a voucher system which would divert funding away from their public schools. Here in my home state, families have great public schools and educational choices for their children. Under some circumstances, parents may work with local superintendents to arrange for inter or intra-district enrollment. Maine has 9 charter schools and 1 magnet school, all of which are held to Maine standards of accountability. In other words, we have a public education system that works for us as a state, and imposing a new national voucher program would simply drain programs away from our resources away from our existing schools. Now, at PTA, our mission is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. It's very important that parents and others who care about our families, students, and schools take action on this bill as soon as possible and share your voice and perspective with your congressional representatives. One easy way to do this is to text the word vouchers to 50457 to join national PTA and PTAs across the country in opposing the creation of a national school voucher system that would redirect billions of taxpayer dollars away from public schools. So please text vouchers to 50457. For over 128 years, our association has worked to ensure all schools have the proper resources needed to help all children learn and grow and succeed. We know that the long-term success of our nation depends on quality federal investments in our education system. That's why we continue to raise our voice, calling on Congress and the administration to champion federal investment that supports our nation's schools, including protecting our public schools and the millions of families and children served by them. To be clear, our association supports educational choices within public schools to meet the diverse needs of all students, and we believe parents and families should be involved in all aspects of public school choice. However, there is a difference between public school choice programs and the use of taxpayer dollars for private school voucher programs and all the problems inherent with those that you're hearing about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginny. And last but not least, by a long shot, we have Maria Clark. She's representing parents and is in Kentucky. Maria, would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Clark, and I am also very proud to be here today, standing alongside these parents and leaders in opposing the Educational Choice for Children Act, or ECCA. I'm here today because I have 2 children in the Davis County Public School System here in Western Kentucky, a state where just 6 months ago, voters in all 120 counties rejected a proposal to mandate a statewide school voucher program. In addition to being a parent of kids in public schools, I serve on the board for our local public schools foundation. And in that capacity, I have learned about the countless ways in which public schools serve our students and families well beyond their education. I have been inside the schools, talked with administrators and resource counselors, worked with the students, and I know what's right and what's important to me and my community. And that is fairness for every child to have access to a high-quality education. Everyone has a right to equal opportunity. ECCA runs contradictory to that belief, and it is not what I want for my kids, for my home state of Kentucky, or for children and families in the United States. I'm extremely concerned about what will happen if ECCA or a federal school voucher program becomes law and the domino effect of ramifications that will be felt in my daughter's public schools, as well as public schools across the country. I have conservative friends and neighbors, including those with children in private schools, and they all agree that it is crucial that education decision-making remain at the state and local level. While some states have adopted vouchers, others, like my home state of Kentucky, have not, and we have absolutely no interest in it. So why is Congress, specifically a Republican Congress, voting to force a voucher program on our state? How does creating a new national education program for private schools return education back to the states? How does that respect local control? Rather than fully funding special education or working to ensure that we have great teachers who are motivated to remain in their roles with small class sizes in all our public schools, some folks in Congress want to spend $5 billion a year to give a tuition discount to parents who already send their kids to private schools. That just doesn't make sense to me. We know that voucher proposals will hurt Kentucky public schools and public schools across the United States by draining critical resources from our communities, making them more difficult places to live, to start a business, or to raise a family, and overall exacerbating socioeconomic disparities. If you're a parent like me and you want to make sure public dollars stay in public schools that accept every child, regardless of their family background, their ability to pay, their ability to read on grade level, ability to speak English, what religion they are, or what disability they have, then I urge you to speak out. Join me and millions of other parents in opposing ECCA and fight to keep funding in our public schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you everyone to all of our panelists. We will now go to the Q&A section of the town hall. I will be looking in the Q&A box and just pulling them out as they came in. And if you have any questions, please make sure to put those in the Q&A box now. If we don't have time to get to every question, we will follow up with you. We'll have Lara follow up with you. You can also email those questions to media@aasa.org. And I would ask, if you're asking a question, if you could please also identify if you're with an organization or an outlet as part of that question. So our first question is from Brian, and he wants to know how we can be better advocates and have our voices heard, and what are some recommended steps that we can take as school leaders. So Dave, I'm going to throw that one to you first, if you don't mind answering Brian.
Yeah, for sure. I think we have to be very vocal. I think we have to talk to and contact our legislators, our congressmen, and our U.S. senators. And, you know, I think Amy's points about numbers and finances could really have an impact on senators, staffers, and aides to think about just the financial implications over time. Like, I think all of us agree on our premise, but how we convince others, we have to talk to them in a way that's going to impact their thinking. And I think pocketbooks matter to senators. And I think, you know, if I could give a suggestion, yes, tell the story that everybody has told. Maria, I love the way you framed it around the impact it would have on communities. I think that was a brilliant way to frame it. And then really come in hard on the numbers and the finances and the fiscal implications. And the other thing I would say is, you know, I know a lot of us talked about you know, being able to pick and choose who and which students are allowed in. But there's another thing that we don't talk about because we don't think about it in public education. They can also kick kids out whenever they want. And they come back to our public schools. You know what we do? We educate every kid who walks through that schoolhouse door on a Monday morning, no matter what, you know? And there are private schools that you have a disciplinary infraction, you're done that day. You got to go, they're going to kick you out. You got to go somewhere else. So I think ensuring that our legislators really have an understanding of the fiscal implications is super important. And it goes back to just There's not interest. It's not popular anywhere. That's why it keeps being voted down. People that have kids in public schools love their public schools. I'm not suggesting we're perfect. No one is, but we're getting better every day. We're getting better every day. And so I just think we have to be vocal. This is the time. In the past, we've been able to beat this back at the state level in many places and at the federal level. This is already through one chamber, my friends, right? And we have a president who has indicated he will sign it. We have got to do everything in our power to make sure the senators go in with eyes wide open when they take that vote, the impact it will have on our students with disabilities, right? The fiscal implications for our schools and our local communities, right? And I think, you know, if you've visited any countries that have state-sponsored schools and public schools, the facilities look very, very different, very different. And I would hope that our representatives and our senators have gone and visited countries that have approved similar plans. Because I tell you what, you have one facility where they have the absolute best technology in the world, and you have another facility that has super high class sizes, and the parking lot that the teachers park in is exactly where they have recess. The instructional materials look different. The teachers in both schools are doing phenomenal work, as you would expect, because our teachers are incredible. But the opportunities look very, very different. And so our senators and representatives need to understand that if this is approved, they are creating two completely different educational systems that taxpayer dollars will be used to support. And that is simply not American.
Thank you, Dave. We have a question from Gregory asking about how the tax shelter would be administered. Is it true that the shelter would be more valuable for residents in states without current state voucher systems? And if so, why would this be the case? Amy, I am going to throw that one to you, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thanks for the question. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, this tax shelter is most valuable to the wealthiest people, and a disproportionate share of wealthy people actually live in states that have largely rejected vouchers, like New York, New Jersey, California. So it actually is something that's as much about inequality, increasing inequality, as it is about undermining our public schools. I mean, it's going to do both. The other thing is that the tax shelter is especially lucrative for wealthy people who live in states that have robust income taxes, which, you know, we very much support here at ITEP, because they can use the shelter to dodge not just federal taxes, but state taxes as well. So that would make it, again, actually more valuable to places that have historically embraced strong public school systems and not necessarily vouchers. So that's the quick answer to that. And I just want to say one quick thing to add on to David's great answer to the prior question. We're happy to bring the wonky, boring points, and we're glad if anyone uses them. But also, like, you all are experts in your own lives. So if you are a parent, if you are a teacher, if you are a community member, like, you know, use our numbers by all means, but do not be confused. Like, legislators are really compelled by your own stories and what's going on in your communities and with your kids. So thanks to everyone on this call.
Thank you, Amy. Another participant has said our state has a voucher program. Let's say that the state voucher allocation is $7,000. If a private school's tuition is $10,000, will parents be able to receive a tax credit through ECCA for that $3,000 or the entire $10,000? So Jacqueline, are you able to take this one?
Sure. I'm going to do my best for whomever provided this question. So my understanding of how ECCA is being administered is that a wealthy individual, as Amy just mentioned, will likely donate either stocks or they will give some sort of funding to what is called an SGO, a scholarship granting organization. It's an intermediary. And then that SGO has the capacity to deliver to eligible recipients a certain amount of money. Now, here's the part to get to the question and the answer. There's no cap on how much that SGO can administer to the eligible recipient. So if you're in a state with a $7,000 voucher for a private school and the private school's tuition is $10,000 and you're seeking a $3,000 essentially subsidy, not a tax credit, but a subsidy to pay for that private school tuition, you could ask that scholarship granting organization for that amount of money, maybe $3,000 to supplement that. But that SGO could give you anywhere from $500 to $20,000, which is much more than your scholarship would be needed. And in that case, it's deeply inequitable across recipients and eligibility. And I think I just want to make sure everyone's clear. Those that are attending private schools right now are likely to be the ones receiving the scholarship granting organization's funding because they're already in the school. And it's more likely that we see the haves have more and the have-nots have even less because of this bill. And so I want it to be very clear that while it sounds nice to get a subsidy for that tuition, that's not going to happen for every child in America. It's going to happen for a very select few, and it may not even be necessary for those select few to receive the subsidy because they already are affluent enough to afford the tuition.
Can I jump in for a second, Aaron? Because one of the things we've seen in a couple states that have passed voucher programs is what the private schools do is just increase their tuition. And it creates even a bigger disparity. And the parents are paying the same as they've always paid, but the voucher goes on top of that. So it even prevents it restricts even greaterly is not a word, but you know what I'm saying, creates a greater disparity between those that can get in and use the voucher and those that can't. We've seen that quite frequently around the country.
Thank you, Dave. Cynthia is asking how we alert our community as soon as possible, in addition to sharing with friends. She's saying, should we be alerting our local PTAs? All my congressional representatives are already opposing the big, beautiful, and disastrous bill. Ginny, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can add a little to that. By all means, reach out to your PTAs. If there are other parent groups that aren't PTAs, reach out to them through your churches. Amanda can address that as well, I'm sure. Like you, our congressional people from Maine are opposed to the voucher system, but it still really helps for them to hear from us, because the more voices they hear, the stronger their voices can be about when dealing with those who are in favor of it. Talk to family, talk to friends, talk it up, letters to the editor. I know we need to move quickly on this, but spread the word however you can, and PTAs are a great way to do it. Hopefully, at least someone in every PTA has gotten a notice from National PTA asking them to weigh in on this and to contact members of Congress as well.
Great.
And I'll add to that, Aaron, to the second part of Cynthia's question about any concerns with being too, quote, political in church. And I get this question a lot because I think there's confusion about the IRS's ban on partisanship, on intervening in a political campaign, which 501c3s, including churches, are barred from doing. That is very different from this nonpartisan activity, which is really just advocating to our representatives. This is really just core to what it means to be a participant in American democracy, is to make our views known. And so there's really no concern from a tax or legal perspective about church engagement and being involved in opposing legislation such as this one. So yes, I would encourage those of you who are active in houses of worship, and you can find the arguments that we've made here on the No Vouchers website as well about how religious freedom is really harmed by voucher schemes like this one.
Thanks, Amanda. Susan Campbell is asking, is there a direct relationship between the tax breaks and the funds available to public schools? If so, what is the specific relationship, or how will less money flow to schools? Amy, are you able to kick that one off?
Yes, thank you. And there are lots of questions in the chat, so it's hard to keep up. But yes, I mean, basically that you know, the federal and state governments will be collecting less revenue. And so the way they will respond to that less revenue is to cut funding for things that they currently fund, which public schools is one big example. It might not be a dollar for dollar cut in that kind of broader case. However, often when the way state formulas may work is that dollars sometimes follow the students. So if you see students specifically leaving public schools and going to voucher schools, you may see dollars follow that student out of the school. But as David and others have said, a lot of these dollars will actually go to families that are already using private schools. And in that case, it won't be like a $1-for-$1 cut to public education, but it will be a $1-for-$1 cut to lots of things that we care about, whether it's hunger, whether it's healthcare, or whether it's public education or something else. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. We have a question from Julie saying amazing things are happening in our public schools. How do we get our state and federal reps in our schools to see the good? Also, how do we own the NAEP scores, but also turn the narrative to one day, one snapshot is not the entirety of a student's progress and potential. A student's education is so much more than one data point. I think a lot of our panelists will probably have something to say on this. But why don't we start with you, Jacqueline?
I really appreciate this question because it's at the root of why public education is a public good. It's because every 90 to 92% of American students go to a public education system school. And so when we think about NAEP scores, right, we know that NAEP scores have been decreasing over time. And for kids with disabilities specifically, they're either stagnant or lower than they have been, depending on the disability type and the age. And we do need to own that. But I think we also need to own the reality that when we deplete the public school system of the vital and necessary resources to, as David mentioned, get better, expand, scale, do all the things that we know in research and through evidence are good for kids, then we are ostensibly trying to debilitate a public school system that is supposed to educate the preponderance of Americans in an effort to only educate a very slim portion of Americans in the private school system. And I want to be very clear, this piece of legislation it's intentional, as Denise was mentioning. It is intentional to basically hobble the public school system. It will change the way we as Americans educate our kids for the foreseeable future if it passes. And so I would like you to flip the script. I will let you think about when you reach out to your district representatives in their, or your state representatives or your federal representatives in their district offices, and you say to them, come to our school, see what we're doing on behalf of kids, see the evidence and research we're implementing in the classroom. Remind them that $20 billion over 4 years to a private school system could be much better used in a public school system where you need Title I funds and IDEA funds, and you need a profession-ready educator in every classroom. That's where the federal investment with taxpayer dollars should be placed, is in the public system that is a public good.
Jackie, that's just so right. And the other thing that I would offer folks is that when the members of the Senate come home, and they'll be home during July, they'll be home during August, that is the time to invite them. Schools may not be open, but gather a group of parents around the table to talk to them about how your students are doing. There are bright spots across this country, and we need to lift up those stories because, as David said, there's not enough places, but there are places, and we just need more people to know about them, and we need more investment in those types of practices, policies, and programs that support all kids, not just a few.
I think that's absolutely right. And, AASA launched last month our new transformation initiative, the Public Education Promise, the American Dream in Action, as we really work with our school leaders and regional hubs across the country to transform public education. And our fifth principle of that is measure what matters. And we all talk about, NAEP scores not being great. Could we have a conversation about, is NAEP the right assessment? I mean, some of those questions were written in 1970s. There's a question in there about phone booths. Are you kidding me? Tell me a 5th or an 8th grader that even knows what a phone booth is. If you want America's public schools to be the best test takers in the world, we can do it. We can absolutely do it. We will teach to the test. We will get rid of everything that matters really to us. We can get rid of the arts. We can get rid of music. We can get rid of CT, and we'll just teach to the test. But you know what? That's not what we've ever been told our country wants us to do. Our country has told us the public education system needs to prepare kids to be able to enter the workforce upon graduation, go to college, be a good citizen, a responsible citizen, ensure the democracy continues, that we have a workforce for the greatest economy the world has ever seen. We have to decouple student performance from school accountability. Because if a kid graduates at 18 and has an electrician's apprenticeship making $60,000 a year, I could care less how they did on their ACT. We have to measure what matters based on the career pathway that that child chooses in conjunction with their parents and their families. And that's why this bill is so important, because our public schools do that. Our public schools can provide opportunities for pathways for our kids to ensure that whatever it is that they decide to do, they can do it. And taking money away prevents our schools from being able to provide pathway opportunities. If we want to measure what matters, then we have to be given the resources to build out those opportunities for our children. And we can do it. And to Denise's point, when you bring those parents in, you bring those kids in, show them the cool things that are happening that you are not going to be able to continue to support without those funds. That's important for them to see, to feel, to be a part of. And always incorporate the student voice. We have to do such a better job of telling our story, because we as educators care about making sure every kid has access and opportunity and is successful. And that's amazing. I love that about us as public educators. And there are great stories you can share. You show me one public school where there's not something great happening. They don't exist. Tell the story, measure what matters, and let's work together to make sure public dollars stay in our public schools.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm going to put in the chat right now, just for everyone, novouchers.org, so that you can tell your member of Congress, and you can tell Congress to stand up for public schools. We have time for one more. I'll quickly, I've noticed that there are a few questions touching on homeschooling and whether and how homeschooling is affected by this bill. So let's take that one. Amanda, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, just quickly, there are efforts to expand what are called 529 accounts for homeschooling in this provision, and that's also a big problem, in addition to all the problems we've raised about the new tax credits or really tax shelters for private school education here. And that's something that the coalition that our groups are a part of, NCPE, has opposed in the past. And so we continue to be concerned about that. I did want to note, as we've all been here, the Supreme Court handed down an unsigned opinion that is really a win for public education in rejecting what would essentially turn out to be religious public charter schools. So that is an important win that happened this morning, and they think that should just embolden us all more to oppose what is essentially a backdoor way to try to do what can't be done in the front door, to siphon off public funding and send it into private education. And so I hope that we can take that win at the Supreme Court and turn it into even stronger advocacy in Congress now.
Thank you, Amanda. We're at time. Thank you, everyone, for such an excellent conversation and for taking this hour out of your day to keep public dollars in public schools. I know we all really appreciate it. We will do our best to follow up with all of the questions that we did not get to in the Q&A. And please, please contact Congress, let them know that you oppose this bill, and let's keep fighting. Thanks, everyone.